Good morning.
Good
It's
morning.
good to see all of you here today. For those of you who are just joining or maybe haven't been following, each week, we've been going through the book of Ruth. And this book of Ruth, I said in the beginning, it's sort of like one of those limited series shows on Netflix, right? Like a 4-part limited series. And, one of the interesting things I think about Ruth is how each chapter sort of ends, each chapter in the Bible sort of ends a chapter of the story. And so, just to recap really briefly, Ruth 1, you have Elimelech and Naomi leaving Bethlehem and going to Moab. And Moab is the enemy of the Israelites. And so it would be like, Ukrainians going to Russia, moving to Russia in order to find food. And so what ends up happening is Naomi's husband, Elimelech, dies, and also her 2 sons die. And in the culture at that time, a male family member, a spouse or a son, was the way that you were provided for and protected in that society. So Naomi goes to Moab with 3 Jewish men, her husband and her 2 sons, and all 3 of them die. And she returns with her Moabite daughter-in-law named Ruth. And so this is how we get the name of the book, Ruth. And so really, as we go through each chapter, we're finding out how God is moving in the life of Ruth. And so we saw chapter 2, how they have to figure out, now that they move back to Bethlehem, they have to figure out how they're going to get their food. And so Ruth ends up gleaning in a field, picking up the scraps in the field, and ends up in Boaz's field, who is a family kinsman, a redeemer for that family. So it's like a distant relative. And so she ends up at the table of Boaz, and Boaz provides for her, protects her, commands his workers to protect Ruth and not harm her, and tells Ruth, stay in my field so that you don't get abused in any of these other fields. And so you have this picture of Boaz who's using his influence and using his authority in that society to provide for and to protect Ruth. And so then this takes place over the 6 weeks of the barley harvest. And then that's the end of chapter 2. Then chapter 3, we saw last week of the threshing floor, of how this is the culmination of the harvest, where they're winnowing all of the grain. And, we went into a little bit of detail about actually what winnowing was and how to separate all the grain and all of the stuff. And Ruth ends up going, Naomi tells Ruth, why don't you go and sort of seduce Boaz while he is sort of drunk on happiness, and also maybe drunk on wine, right? But drunk on happiness of like this great harvest. Why don't you go and seduce him? And, if he sleeps with you, then maybe he'll marry you. And if he doesn't marry you, maybe you'll get pregnant, and then, maybe then he'll marry you, or you'll basically force the situation. And we saw this sort of situation in Ruth chapter 3, where Boaz sees her and says, you know what, I'm not gonna do it this way. We're gonna do it the right way. And then he says, stay here. I'm going to provide for you. He gives her grain, basically to drag home, like this abundance of grain. And then he also protects her reputation by saying, stay here so that nobody sees you leaving here and thinks that you're a prostitute, that you're prostituting yourself. So we saw how Ruth is a poor Moabite widow. She was an immigrant, a foreigner. She was a migrant worker. She may have been trafficked by her mother-in-law, and she was a woman in that society. Now, I want to pause and say, there have been some awkward moments, I think, through these 3 chapters, where I keep sort of referencing how these women in that society needed a man. And so I want to just put out there that I don't believe that that is true for women. I don't believe that that is a biblical principle for women. All I'm saying is that in that moment, in that cultural situation at the time, that was how women were protected and provided for in that society. And so we shouldn't take from that, women need a man to provide for and protect them. I'm not saying that. If anything, what you're seeing is how Ruth, being a woman and being poor and being an immigrant and being a migrant and maybe being trafficked, and yet she is the one who is the protagonist of this whole scripture. She is the one whom God overwhelmingly protects. So even though she was left the most vulnerable, she is the one that God shows up for. She is the one that God brings this provision and protection. And so whether you feel like you are on the outskirts of society, whether you feel like you are broken in society, if you feel like you are overlooked in society, if you feel like you are being oppressed in society, you may find that in the story of Ruth, you are reminded that God is on the side of the broken. So we saw at the end of chapter 3, Boaz basically saying to her, I'm gonna do what you're asking me to do. I'm gonna redeem your situation. I will be the man in your life to provide for and protect you. But there's someone that is closer. So he says, I am a relative of yours, but there is someone closer. And so if that person doesn't do it, then I will redeem you. And so this is the end of chapter 3. We come to Ruth chapter 4. And for... Here we go. So we come to Ruth chapter 4. Now this is what it says in Ruth chapter 4. It says, now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. So basically goes into the town center. And behold, the Redeemer, the one of whom Boaz had spoken, came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And then he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. He's convening a group, right? He's calling everybody to a meeting. And he says to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. Naomi is selling her land, and you are a redeemer. So he says, so I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. So what he's saying is, he convenes this group and he says, okay, Naomi, you remember she moved to Moab. She's come back and she's selling the parcel of land that they live on. So you have first rights. So do you want to redeem the land? Now, if you've been here the last 3 weeks, you're like, what? We didn't hear about land, right? It's not like Ruth went into the threshing floor and was like, psst, Naomi's selling her plot of land. No. It was a lot more sort of, sexual, right? It was a lot more nefarious than just selling a plot of land. And yet here we have Boaz in chapter 4 saying, there is a plot of land that is going to be sold. Do you want the plot of land? What's going on here? So there's something that's a little bit interesting here. And what we're seeing here is something that is talking about this idea of a next of kin redeemer. So he's saying that out of all the people that are related to Naomi, you are the one who is most closely related, and so you have first right of refusal. This is what it would say in Leviticus 25:25. It says, if your brother becomes poor and sells part of his property, then his nearest redeemer shall come and redeem what his brother has sold. So this idea of a redeemer built into the Old Testament, culture, was if somebody, lost part of their land, the first person to have the right to do it was the closest relative. And so a brother could come and buy back the land so that it would stay in the family. So they could buy back land, or also they could buy back a servant. This is later on in Leviticus 25. It says, if a stranger or sojourner with you becomes rich, and your brother besides him becomes poor and sells himself to the stranger or sojourner with you, or to a member of the stranger's clan, then after he is sold, he may be redeemed, reclaimed, rebought. One of his brothers may redeem him, or his uncle or his cousin may redeem him, or a close relative from his clan may redeem him. So if you lose a plot of land, a relative can buy it back. If you sell yourself to someone, then another relative can come and redeem you. Or you could even marry a widow. Deuteronomy 25 says this. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. Now, I understand that the picture of a brother sleeping with the widow of, his brother's spouse is a little bit weird for us in our culture and our society. That does not seem like the best way to take care of someone after they're mourning the death of their husband. But understand, when somebody in the family is mourning, when somebody is in the family and you gather everyone together and you say, hey, let's fly to that city, let's take care of them, let's cook meals for them, let's give them money, let's set them up for success. That's what we do in society now. What they did in society back then was do what it took to get them a male, to get them a son. Because that son was what provided for and protected them in that society. And so what we do is when we fly into town, we give them, cook them meals and things like that. This is that version of that for that society. If you have any other questions about that, Dave will be here after the service. He will answer every question. Yeah, Pastor Dave. So here, you see, right? You could buy back a plot of land, you could buy back a person, or you could help out and redeem a widow. Now, the example of this is the story of Tamar, right? We talked about Tamar before. And so this idea of Tamar was she seduced her father-in-law in order to get a child. And so she seduced her father-in-law, dressed up as a prostitute, and basically was impregnated by her father-in-law because the father-in-law was not providing a male for her, was not allowing the brother to impregnate Tamar to give her an offspring. So you may remember this story where Tamar is the one who actually is blessed and redeemed because she ends up having a child through this manner. So you can see how this next of kin redeemer is on display in Tamar's story. Tamar finds a child, gets a child through this sort of nefarious deception, but yet the fact that she is blessed with a son means that she's blessed in society. And so even though Tamar went all sorts of different nefarious ways to be able to get this son, she nevertheless is deemed blessed by having this son. And so you could see how this would be playing on in the mind of Naomi in Ruth chapter 3 when she's trying to get Ruth to seduce Boaz. Because it didn't matter how Tamar got the son. It was just she was blessed by having the son herself. So there are three characteristics that you need to be able to be a redeemer. So the first thing is you need to be able to do it. Meaning, if you want to buy back the plot of land, you need to be able to have the means to do it. You have to have the means to buy back the land or the servant. You need to have the means. Second thing is you need to be willing. Here in Ruth chapter 4, you see Boaz asking this redeemer, are you willing to do it? If you're not willing to do it, then let me know and I will do it. So you have to be willing. So there's a choice in the matter. So you need to be able to do it. You need to be willing to do it. And the third thing is that you need to have the blood. You need to be a blood relative in order to qualify to be able to do it. It wasn't just an open auction. It was following in through the bloodline to say, I will do it, I'm able to do it, and I qualify because of the blood that I have. And all of this is basically to buy back that which was lost. A plot of land, a person's freedom, or a widow, to buy back, to redeem those things. I need to be able to do it, I need to be willing to do it, and I need to have the blood to be able to do it. So when Boaz is talking to this redeemer about the land, he's basically saying, are you able, are you willing, and because you have the blood, to buy back that which was lost, to keep Naomi's plot of land in the family. Will you do it? Now what's interesting here is we end this, this passage where you see this Redeemer. Now, mind you, we don't even know his name. In all of history, we don't know who this person's name is. And if you were watching this on Netflix, you would be like, who is this guy? And it would just be like, Redeemer, in the credits, it would just say Redeemer, like, because he doesn't have a name. We don't even know who this guy is. And it ends, this passage says, I will redeem it. And you're like, wait a second. I'm sure that all 4 of these chapters are not building up so this faceless, nameless guy is going to redeem this plot of land. I don't even understand what's going on. We're not talking about a plot of land. We're talking about Ruth. We're talking about Naomi. Well, the passage continues in verse 5. It says, Then Boaz said, This day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi. You also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. So he's like, so here, we decree that you get the land. Oh, yeah. She comes, the plot of land also comes with Ruth, a Moabite, right? An enemy. She's a widow, and you need to perpetuate that name. So basically, you don't just get the land, you also have to impregnate a Moabite. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Now, all we're given is these 3 verses about what, this sort of interaction happens. I think Boaz knew what he was doing. I think Boaz was like, hey, would you like a plot of land? And the guy was like, yes. And he's like, okay, great. Now you also have to sleep with a Moabite. And he's like, oh, yeah. No, that may impair my inheritance. I think that means, it's not going to go over great at home, so I'm going to pass, right? So I think Boaz is doing a little bit of a bait and switch, saying, hey, would you like this plot of land? But also it comes after it's like hitting them upside the head with the reality of the transaction. It's the fine print, right? And then the Redeemer's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And so then Boaz now has rightful claim to be able to do it. So in verse 7 it says this, Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. This is how you ratify this sort of arrangement. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. So this is the moment where Boaz stakes a rightful claim to not just the plot of land, but also to redeeming Ruth as well. Verse 9, it says this, Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon, the 2 sons. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. The elders say, may you be blessed. And in that blessing, they say, may you be blessed like the house of Perez, who was the son that Tamar bore to Judah. So may you be blessed in the same way that Tamar was given Perez, her son, when she seduced Judah. May you be so blessed. So you see the comparison here between Perez being born to Tamar and what Boaz has done to redeem Ruth. The Bible is saying this is how you are going to make this blessing, enact this blessing upon Ruth's life. So Boaz decides and declares it publicly, And this is how the arrangement moves forward. Verse 13, it says, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, 'Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him.' Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, 'A son has been born to Naomi.' They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David." She gets the son. She gets the son. Ruth and Boaz give birth to Obed. And what's interesting is, right, we've been following along with Ruth throughout this whole book. But who is the one at the end who ends up holding the child and receiving the blessings from the society? It's Naomi. Now, you know how I feel about Naomi, right? I mean, I don't think Naomi is one to be revered in this book. I don't think Naomi is the one that we should be modeling our behavior after. In fact, Naomi, I think time and time again throughout chapter 1, 2, 3, she's showing how she is not a woman of faith, how she is a woman of manipulation, how she is, trying to take things onto by herself, and yet she is the one who lays the child in her lap. And the blessing of the townspeople say, Naomi has been given a son. Well, it's not a son, it's a grandson. But understand that in that society, Obed being born to Ruth was as if Naomi had her own son, because she needs a male in that society to provide for and protect her. So not only Ruth, but now Naomi as well are given this blessing through Obed. Now, you're saying, wow, we're going 20 minutes on this transaction that happened in this, ancient times. And, okay, great. She was given a child. Why couldn't they just do this in 2 verses? Right? And you see the culmination of Ruth 4 chapters culminating on the fact that this Obed is being born to Ruth and Naomi. And then it says there, they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. That David is King David. That King David is the king of the Jews. The King David, the most famous Jewish king, is related through Obed. This is the moment where the Jews reading this story would go, wow. Oh, now it all makes sense. Because up to this point, maybe you're reading this for the first time, you're saying, why are we reading this story about a Moabite? We are Jews. Why are we reading this story about how God is redeeming a Moabite widow? Well, the Moabite widow gives birth to Obed, who is the father of Jesse and the father of David. And so you recognize that at that moment, the lineage of King David goes through a Moabite widow's womb. This pristine, this revered, this venerated King David goes through Ruth. The genealogy of David goes through Ruth. That is something that is profound for a Jewish audience. In fact, you may not know this, but every year when the Jews celebrate it's a festival called Shavuot. It's basically celebrating the festival of the weeks, right, of the harvest. They gather together in synagogues. Even to this day, they celebrate. This is one of the sort of Jewish holidays that they celebrate. They gather in the synagogue and they read through Ruth to this day. Which is ironic because the Jews are reading in a synagogue, in a Jewish ceremony, the story of a Moabite widow. But Ruth 4 continues. It doesn't just end here. It ends with a genealogy. It says this, now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Aminadab. Aminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. Now you're thinking, this has been this amazing story. This limited series on Netflix for 4 weeks. I've been gripped. I've been pulled in. I've been taken on a journey. I've moved to Moab and I've moved back. I've gone in the field. I've gone on the table, the threshing floor, the cover of darkness. I've seen it all. And you end with a genealogy? Like you end with 15 names? That is not a way to end a story. That is just it's the most boring way, honestly, to end the story. Can you imagine if you were going into a movie and you were loving this movie and at the end, they literally just ended with a list of the generations that came through? But you see, what we don't realize, or what we may not realize, is that it's linking it from Perez to David through Obed. Right? So you take Perez, when we told the story of Tamar, we were probably judging it pretty hard, right? Here's this woman who dresses up like a prostitute to seduce her father-in-law. You're going to get born out of that child, Perez, is in the lineage of David. And the same lineage carries Obed, who's born to a Moabite widow. You see, the genealogy of David, the lineage of David goes through Perez and through Obed. And so if you were a Jewish person reading this and you came to this genealogy, you would go, no way! We look at it and go, what? But if you were a Jew, you would read this, you go, Perez? Obed? David? No way. This would be the twist at the end of the movie where you go, oh, he was Kaiser Soze the whole time? It's that sort of a twist. You're like, David comes through Obed and Perez? That's the twist. It reminds me of a genealogy, and if we're being honest, we don't read genealogies, right? When we read genealogies, we just kind of okay, yeah. There's a bunch of guys. It's a bunch of names, right? We don't actually read it because we don't know the history of all of this. But when you read this genealogy, it sort of hits you in the face and you go, oh my goodness, this is where King David has come from. When you take a redeemer who is able and willing and has the blood to be able to redeem, to buy back that which was lost, you see the example of a broken redeemer in this book of Ruth. You see how Ruth was a woman, poor, immigrant, migrant, trafficked, Moabite widow, and yet she was the one who provided the redemption for Naomi. Boaz was this broken redeemer for Ruth. Obed was a broken redeemer for Naomi. You see these examples of broken redeemers. And you see this example of being able and willing and having the blood to be able to redeem. And maybe you are now seeing where we are going with this. To be able to do it, to be willing to do it, and having the blood to be able to redeem that which was lost. You see, Jesus is not in the book of Ruth, but Jesus is all over the book of Ruth. Because Jesus was able to redeem us. Because he did not sin. He was willing to do it, to redeem us. And he had the blood to be able to redeem us. To buy back that which was lost. So when we see the redemption of Boaz in Ruth, we are seeing a picture, a glimpse of the redemption that is available through Jesus. Centuries before Jesus lived on this earth, we're seeing a glimpse of the redemption that Jesus has for us. So that when Jesus comes on the earth and he starts living his life and redeeming that which was lost, I bet that there were Jews that go, oh yeah, it reminds me of the redemption of Boaz. You know, there's a whole bunch of people that have made Ruth and Boaz into a sexual relationship, right? Like this attractional relationship. And I think you could make a case, right? That this is the picture of love. That this is this, soft filter, fuzzy framed, picture of biblical love. This real physical attraction and just like this heart of redemption in marriage. I think you could, but I don't think you have to. And in fact, I think if you make Boaz and Ruth physically attracted to each other as like this beautiful picture of what marriage should look like, I think it actually distracts from the message of what Ruth is going on. I think that the picture of this consummation between Boaz and Ruth is actually the transactional redemption. And I don't think it needs to be anything more than that. It doesn't have to be this physical attraction, this sexual attraction. I think even just in the transactional redemption of Ruth, in just the I literally don't know if Boaz and Ruth had sex after Obed. Because the redemption that Boaz gave to Ruth was giving a male son. It's kind of an awkward time to walk into a sermon, but so the transactional redemption was to give her a son, and so I don't know that their marriage relationship continued after that, because the point of the redemption was to give her an heir, to give her provision and protection in perpetuity, and to provide that. So you see how Boaz's redemption of Ruth mirrors the redemption that we see in Jesus as we know him to be. Able to do it, willing to do it, and having the blood to do it, to buy back that which was lost. So Ruth ends with the genealogy, and I want to end this 4-week sermon series with a genealogy. I'm going to read for you Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 16. And you're thinking, oh my goodness, a genealogy? Really? You're really taking this to heart? Ending with a genealogy? You literally just told us this is the worst way to end something, and I'm going to do it. You have read Matthew 1 through 16 before in your life. I can almost guarantee everybody in here has read it at least once, because you all made that New Year's resolution to start reading the Bible, and you said, okay, I'm going to read the New Testament, I'm going to start Matthew 1, I'm going to read Matthew 1, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's 16 verses of a genealogy. You've read this before, and you've skipped over it. I can't even, I'm admitting this. I used to, when I read genealogies, you get so caught up with the pronunciation of names that I literally used to just use the first letter of the name. That's how insignificant these people were, because I'm like, I don't want to just spend so much time pronouncing their names that I'm just going to get through it. And I would say A begat P and P begat C, right? That's what I would do, because I don't want to have to learn how to pronounce their names. Let me read this for you. A record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So understand, we're going from Abraham through David to Jesus. This is Matthew 1:1. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac, the father of Jacob. Jacob, the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz, Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife, Bathsheba. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam, the father of Abijah. Abijah, the father of Asa. Asa, the father of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat, the father of Jehoram. Jehoram, the father of Uzziah. Uzziah, the father of Jotham. Jotham, the father of Ahaz. Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah, the father of Manasseh. Manasseh, the father of Amon. Amon, the father of Josiah. And Josiah, the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel, the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel, the father of Abiud. Abiud, the father, we're getting there, the father of Eliakim. Eliakim, the father of Azor. Azor, the father of Zadok. Zadok, the father of Akim. Akim, the father of Eliud. Eliud, the father of Eleazar. Eleazar, the father of Mathan. Mathan, the father of Jacob. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. We go from Abraham to David to Jesus through these 5 women. We know Tamar. We know that she was the father-in-law seducer dressed up as a prostitute in order to impregnate herself. We know Ruth, the poor Moabite, immigrant, migrant, trafficked widow. Rahab. Who was Rahab? We don't have time to go into all of these stories. Rahab was the Jericho prostitute who was the one through whom Israel was protected and saved in Joshua. A Jericho prostitute. Who was Bathsheba? Well, Bathsheba was the one who King David saw bathing when he should have been at war, and he was watching Bathsheba bathe and basically murdered her husband by putting him on the front lines of the war so that he could then marry her and sleep with her. This is Bathsheba. It's hard to put all of that in a phrase. I said sexual victim of King David. I mean, talk to Dave afterwards. He'll tell you. And then you have Mary. Now, you know, we have the picture of Mary of this, pristine young, but she was a single, pregnant, teenage virgin. Each one of those things can be scandalous. The genealogy of Jesus, make no mistake, includes these 5 women. And understand that genealogies did not include women. You did not include, no, it doesn't say, this person was the father of this person. And the only times that women are mentioned were these 5 names. You don't need to include women in the genealogies. So the writer of Matthew went out of his way to introduce these 5 women. You could have just gone from Judah to the next one. But you bring in Tamar. You bring in Rahab. You bring in Ruth and Bathsheba. The reason why is because we see ourselves in this genealogy. Because the lineage of Jesus, the lineage of David, the lineage of Abraham goes through these 5 women. On the outskirts of society, not even part of that society, non-Jewish lineage, a Moabite, a Jericho prostitute. The lineage of Jesus' redemption goes through Tamar and Rahab and Ruth and Bathsheba and Mary. What do we learn from this? What do we learn from this genealogy? What we learn and what we realize is that Jesus came to earth in order to bring redemption, to buy back that which was lost. And he took his lineage, not from the most pristine lineage of perfect blood, but through Tamar and Rahab and Ruth and Bathsheba and Mary, and said, I am here to buy back that which was lost. And so I'm going to come from brokenness in order to restore brokenness. I'm going to come from those that are on the outskirts of society. My lineage includes these people. I am born out of this brokenness in order to redeem that which was broken. So if you are sitting here and you find yourself feeling like you are on the outskirts of society, that you are too broken to be redeemed, understand that Jesus' lineage comes from brokenness. That he came from brokenness to redeem the broken. That we as the Tamars, as the Rahabs, as the Ruths and Bathshebas and the Marys of society are not left without a Savior, but are ones that are included in the lineage, in the genealogy of our Savior. It's not that Jesus reaches down just from heaven and picks us up. No. He has entered into our brokenness. He has sat in our brokenness, and he says, I am able, I am willing, and I will spill my blood to buy back that which was lost. As you sit here and you carry the brokenness of your own identity, as you carry the brokenness of where you sit in society, as you carry the brokenness of how you see yourself or how others have seen you throughout your life, Jesus does not judge you. He embraces you. He comes from you in order to bring redemption. So if you are broken by society's standards, congratulations. You can be redeemed by Jesus. Let's pray. Just take about 30 seconds and just respond in gratitude to the Lord for the redemption that we have in Jesus. Jesus, we are grateful. God, we're thankful that you who has seen our brokenness, you do not judge us, but you embrace us and you redeem us. That you accept us despite our brokenness, through our brokenness, for our brokenness. That, Lord, the people in this room, though we are broken, can find redemption through Jesus. Lord, we are marveling at your goodness, marveling at your redemption, that you would be able and willing to spill your blood to buy us back. Remind us of that truth throughout this week, Lord.